We are very happy to have in our studio Claus Hjort Frederiksen, the Minister of Employment of Denmark. Mr. Frederiksen has been a senior official in the ruling Liberal Party since 1971, and from 1985 to 2001 he was the Secretary General of the Liberal Party, and since 2001 he has been the Minister of Employment. And Mr. Frederiksen's record in the ministry is something of an envy to most European capitals, because under his leadership Denmark has achieved the highest employment rate in Europe. Unemployment rate is now 4.5%, which is a kind of 30-year low compared to 1990s when Denmark had about 12% unemployment. So this is a very enviable achievement. On top of that, Mr. Frederiksen and his Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, they have formed a Globalization Council, which has been in fact one of the first in Europe to address the question of globalization head-on and come up with some very concrete suggestions. So we are very happy to have Mr. Frederiksen in our studio. Welcome to Yale, Mr. Frederiksen.
Thank you very much.
So my first question to you would be, how did you do it? This lowering the unemployment rate to 4.5% is quite remarkable in Europe, where unemployment rate is so much higher, something 12% some places.
In the short term, we looked at figures in the 2002, 2003, and everybody was expecting things to change in Europe. You know, the German economy was doing poorly, the French economy was doing poorly, but the economists told us all the time that the upswing was just around the corner, so we should just have some patience. But at a certain time in 2003, 2004, we decided that we would create our own economic upswing, and we started a consumer-driven drive in the economy. We made some tax reductions, some public investments, and people had more money on their hands. And from that time on, the Danish economy has performed very well, and I think is you shouldn't brag, but I think it's the most solid economy that you have in all Europe. We pay off our debts, we have surpluses on the balance of payment, and as you said, we have very low unemployment.
Now, Denmark is now very well known for this model of flexicurity, combining flexibility for the employers to hire and fire workers and job security for the workers at the same time. Now this is apparently kind of pretty contradictory task. So how did you go about addressing these two different goals in one package?
In a way, it is a paradox that you have a country with the highest or second highest tax burden in the world. The cost of living is very high. And you have very high allowances. If you lose your job or you get sick, you get practically the same amount as if you were working. And then we have so low unemployment. And I often say that if we had discussed this 15 years ago, my answer would have been that we should reduce the allowances, we should reduce the subsidies for people, and we should reduce the taxes. But it shows that the combination of having high allowances and a very easy hire and fire system, you can hire people, you can fire people very easily. That combination makes people braver, I think, in changing jobs, in willingness to try something else.
Because I understand that once a worker is fired, he or she normally gets a job back within a year. Normally, 70% of them. Right?
Yes, get a job within that period of time. And then we have the third leg of our policies is that we have an active labor market policy where if people have been unemployed for some months, not finding an adequate job within their field of profession, then we start with upgrading their qualifications and
retraining them.
Retraining people.
Yeah.
So we have a very active retraining. We have high allowances so they don't have to leave house and home when they lose their job. And then for the employer, the very important thing that if he gets orders and needs more staff, he can hire them immediately. If he loses orders, he can fire people. And that gives us a very, very high flexibility. I can give you a number if you should normally be careful with numbers, but the Danish workforce is 2.5 million people. And each year, 800,000 people change jobs.
Wow.
And that means that there is a very underlying strong movement in the labor force.
And their social security, medical benefit, they stay all the time? They don't?
Yes, we have, you get 90% of your income for a 4-year period when you get unemployed. Quite a long period, but it stresses the need for us to see to that people apply for jobs, because that is, of course, the weakness in our system. When you have high allowances that are comparable to your
original salary
earnings, then the system has to be very consequent and very strict that if you do not seek jobs, if you do not take adequate jobs, then of course you are sanctioned by not getting your allowances.
So as the allowance is reduced.
Or disappear for a period of time.
I see. So that's the kind of bit of stick to make sure that people do seek job and don't stay on the dole.
Yes.
Right. Now, this, of course, this high insurance that you are paying the workers, it costs the government a lot of money, and you are raising high tax to pay for that. So does that cause any discontent among people that they are paying such high tax?
Funnily enough, all the surveys you see these days, people are not asking for lower taxes, they are asking for a higher quality in the public services. So there is no pressure for lower taxes, but of course Denmark faces a long-term challenge in globalization, with lower production costs, lower taxation elsewhere in the world. So eventually we have gradually to change our tax system and lower our taxes. We realize that.
So your corporate tax, how does it compare to other European countries?
It is about the same.
About the same.
Yes.
But compared to the developing countries, it is pretty high.
Yes, that's what it is. 2 years ago, we realized that we had some challenges in the Danish society. We have, first of all, a demographic challenge. The people get older and older and live and are healthier and healthier, and the generations to take over are much smaller. I can give you a figure that the 1947 generation is the biggest generation in our country. It had some 95,000 newborns. The 1986 generation, which is now about to take over, is only 52,000. So this puts a challenge on our society. That was, then we set up a welfare commission, asked some independent economists to describe the challenges that the Danish society would face in the coming 10, 20, 30, 40 years. They came up with their proposals in January this year, and they were looking at how can we increase the workforce in Denmark, and they pointed at three things. If we could get the young people faster through the educational system so that they could come out half a year or a year earlier, that would give a contribution to the workforce. If we could have much higher participation by immigrants from third world countries, the unemployment among them is unfortunately much higher than by the Danes, but could we reduce it to the same level as the Danes, it would give a very good contribution for the future workforce. And then thirdly, if we could persuade the older people to stay 1 or 2 years longer on the labor market.
What is the retirement age?
It is 65, and then we have some early retirement schemes where you can withdraw at 60. Then we made a compromise in the Danish parliament with 158 members out of the 179 members of parliament, where we postponed over the next 20 years the retirement age from 65 to 67, and on the early retirement scheme from 62 to 60, from 60 to 62, and that gives us sufficient power to take the sting out of the demographic problem that we have. Then we set up a tripart commission, the government, the employees and the employers, to see if we could establish what we have been talking about for many years. How can you establish a system of lifelong learning where you save money for education at a later stage in your life, because maybe your line of business is threatened by globalization, it moves to China or India, and then you have to do something else. And we made an agreement with the partners, the social partners, that at the first coming tariffs negotiations, they will try to make this a part of the tariff, so a percentage is paid into a personal account for each employee in Denmark. And if in 20 years' time or so, there will be sufficient money that you can have your pay compensation through these funds, and then the state guarantees that education is always available.
Yeah, in your the globalization strategy that you launched in this August, you have three components. One is education, stepping up education and giving people higher education. Right now, 45% only go for secondary university education. You want to step that up.
Yes.
And in this three-pronged strategy that you have, if you could explain a little bit as to what it entails.
The whole exercise was to get more people on the labor market in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And we made that primarily by postponing the retirement age and also postponing the age for the early retirement scheme. We then established a lifelong learning system, which is because people are challenged by the globalization, and more of us, I think, may realize that we have to change line of business within our life. If you're trained in one profession, you do not, as you had before, the guarantee that you will be pensioned in that trade. So that is why we concentrate on lifelong learning. And then the Prime Minister himself set up a Globalization Council where there were CEOs, there were union leaders, there were heads of universities and other institutions. They were not representing these institutions, but they were in their own capacity. But of course, it was 25 Danes with influence in the Danish society, and they discussed globalization. What are the challenges we meet? And they came up with, I think, 335 recommendations within the field of education, research, innovation, and things like that, because we realize we have to strengthen the educational system. We have seen the PISA. I don't know if you're familiar with the PISA examinations, where the European school system as such is tested, so you can see which country has the best school system. And we unfortunately could see that in math and in science, we were in the middle, and that was, in our opinion, not good enough to be in the middle of these countries. So we decided to spend billions that we save from postponing the retirement age and the early retirement schemes. We use this money for science research and innovation.
Yeah, about 4% GDP for R&D. Yes. That's your target. Yes. Yeah. In this globalization strategy that I read, I did not see much reference to immigration. What is your policy in terms of encouraging immigration?
We have, first of all, the task of getting the immigrants that we have in Denmark today out on the labor market. I'm sorry to say that we have not been successful enough in integrating immigrants in the labor market. We had for many years had a wrong philosophy. We thought that when people came to Denmark, it was important that they learned the language, that they learned about the Danish society, that they were prepared for coming out in the Danish society. But as everybody realizes, integration goes through a job. And as we kept these immigrants away from a job too long, I know, and you know, that one of the big problems in our societies are that the longer you're away from a job, the more difficult it is to get back to a job. And by having that policy for many years that they should learn Danish first, we failed on this issue. We've now changed things, and we are now doing everything we can to get people a job as fast as possible after they arrive in the country. And we have been confirmed in that since we've been here and seen how you do that, and people manage much better than they do in...
To integrate is much better.
Yes, in our system. So we'll work on several fronts. We'll have a very pragmatic task now to take the immigrants we have, so to say, by the hand and take them to the companies, because the problem is the companies do not seek the immigrants and the immigrants do not seek the companies. So we have a very low practical task to do to connect the two parties. And then we have significant programs that subsidizes their salaries when they come out to the employer, and we can buy colleagues off for hours during the week to function as mentors for them, helping them in on the job. That is one very, very important task that we have, and we have some success with it. And as we started out this conversation, we have a very low unemployment, and that of course helps us immensely solving this problem.
But the general unemployment rate is 4.5%. But what is the unemployment rate among the immigrants?
From third world countries, as the OECD definition goes, is 50%. 50%.
Yes. Yeah. So that is actually a major problem we have.
Yes, and if we can reduce that percent to the 4.5 or even 10%, this will be an immense contribution to solving our long-term problems. But then, of course, we have green card arrangements, and the Europe was 8 new members came in Europe in 2002, and of course we employ many Poles, Lithuanians, Latvians that can come.
I was going to ask you, because since the EU open immigration policy adopted, what has been the impact on Denmark in terms of arrival from Eastern Europe?
It's been very moderate. You know, every time Europe is enlarged, there are these big scare campaigns that we will be overrun by people, but it doesn't happen, and it's been a very organized way, but it has helped us immensely in construction, for example, in agriculture, where we have a big need of manpower, and people from Poland, Lithuania, and so on are helping us tremendously out of that problem.
Even I understand even the postal service are not able to get enough postal delivery person.
That's right. That is a contradiction, that to deliver post and to deliver newspapers, we have to import people from from Poland to perform that job.
Yeah. Now, the latest recent arrest of Danish Muslims from Odense, is that a confirmation that your diagnosis was correct, or is it a challenge that you have to encounter?
I think our diagnosis is correct, that you have to integrate through jobs, and if especially young people walk around unemployed, of course they develop a dissatisfaction, feeling of inferiority or forgottenness by the society, and even though I think that most immigrants find themselves at home in Denmark, of course, when you cannot solve these problems and do not get these young people jobs, it creates a frustration that will unfortunately sometimes break out in very unpleasant things.
Yeah, the question though is this, that this evident alienation of some youth who, being Danish themselves, want to actually blast a bomb in Denmark, is something of a shock, I'm sure, to the population. Now the question is, are they unhappy because they are unemployed or they feel inferior in the society, or is it because they are unhappy with the Danish foreign policy of taking part in Iraq and Afghanistan?
I think it's a mixture of many things. I think for the most young Muslims in Denmark, they like Denmark. That's what we hear. They feel that they are treated well and treated equal. But of course, in all societies, there are people who listen to extremists, and you find pockets somewhere where this is something that could occur, and we have in Denmark haven't had these experiences for many years, but of course since the cartoon crisis in last winter, the consciousness of these problems have become much clearer to us, and that is why we put an extra effort to get the young people in the educational system and get them jobs, because we must realize that too many of them drop out of the school system, end up with too bad qualifications in Danish, and this is where we have to start. So now we have made new apprentices for jobs with a more practical entrance to an education. If you in Denmark want to be a carpenter or a plumber, you're after school being placed at the school bench, starting with the theoretical things. But for this group that had some failures in their school career, they are not very keen to be put on a school bench one more time. So we have to find other entrances, and I think with some success we do that they can come out using their hands in practical work at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. This cartoon controversy, of course, cost Danish business quite an amount in Middle East. How is it doing? Is the things back to normal, or is it still?
What we hear is that it is back to normal, fully back to normal, and there are no repercussions. Arla
was one of the most
the
hardest hit. Yes, Arla is back.
Arla is back. Yes.
And so, what lesson did you draw from this cartoon controversy? How can it be avoided in this kind of situation in the future?
I think there will be a general awareness of it, because I have to make a personal confession in that field. I was never aware that it was forbidden to make a picture of the Prophet, and we're so used to cartoons. I see myself every day cartooned in newspapers. So, frankly, I didn't react when it came up. Mm-hmm. But on the one hand, we shall respect people's religious feelings. But on the other hand, I think it's very important to stress that when you live in a democratic country, you play by the democratic rules, and we have to be very firm on the right for each individual within the framework of legislation to express his or her opinion, and we cannot accept that there are some things that cannot be said. So both parties have to learn from each other. We do not wish to offend people's feelings, but on the other hand, when you live in a democratic state, you must fully understand the conditions of such a state.
Denmark has been one of the rare European countries which strongly supported the U.S. intervention in Iraq, and actually still now have about 500 troops there. How has been the public reaction to this Danish involvement in Iraq?
It has been supported all the way. We were, of course, when the request came from the United States in the beginning, there was I think an animosity that we should participate in the war. But since the decision was made, there has been in all polls